Okay, so thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here for the last session of the conference. So the goal of this panel is to discuss what I guess everybody will see as a potential impact of AI on society. So we won't come back to what is the potential of AI and what it can already do in terms of producing media and interacting with people and replacing people in many capacities. But the goal of the panel is just to focus on what are the impact we can foresee and to some point maybe find ways of mitigating. So we have with us, I will go in order, Robert West from EPFL, who is professor in the computer science department, and then Thomas Blouy, who is a professor of law at the University of Saint-Gallen.
Then we have Maria Eriksson, your postdoc and research associate at the Department of Art, Media and Philosophy at Basel University. And then just next to me, we have Brice Catterin, who's an artist, musician, composer, lots of things that you will tell us about, and also interested in AI. And I'm Béatrice Prunel, chair in digital humanities at the Faculty of Humanities.
Yeah, and I'm François Fleury. I'm in the CS department at University of Geneva. So when we prepared the panel, we realized there were so many things to discuss, so probably 90 minutes is not enough. So we will try to go through some of the topics we identified. So maybe we can just start with a general question. So for each of the panelists, what would be, in a succinct manner, what you think is let's say, the most positive impact we can foresee and the most negative impact we can foresee related to the topic of the panel at the societal level. You can say, I have no idea. We can opt out.
Yeah, I think the positive impact is that we'll be smarter by just augmenting our intelligence further, like we've already been doing with offloading a lot to Google and to the web and so on, and that will be our coexistence with AI will be closer, so that can be good. But of course, for me, one of the things that I'm particularly wary about is that I'm questioning more and more, what does it mean to be human? I have young kids, and I look at them, and then I look at ChatGPT or GPT-4. And it's eating away on what I've been thinking is unique about them. So it's like it keeps pushing me into this existential crisis. You know, what are we even?
No, Bob, you've already said it. I mean, I'm sorry, that was precisely my answer. So I'm trying a different tack. Look, I mean, I think it makes us reflect on who we are. That's really positive, you know. It's in very concrete terms, you know, stuff that so far we have just left to human spontaneity. We are now pushed to reflect upon and to take conscious decisions about, like, you know, the trolley problem. So far we've just left it to, you know, to intuition at the moment. And now we need to reflect upon it because we need to program a computer, or we have an AI that suggests a solution to it. So that's, in a sense, it has the potential to make us better humans by reflecting upon who we are. But then it also has a great potential to make us worse and to bring out the worst, to make discrimination worse, and so on. Good enough?
I think the most promising potential is if these new AI technologies would unleash a new wave of creativity in the arts, in writing, in thinking, in making music, whatever it is, that this technology would force us to reimagine and rethink what art is, in a similar way as we had to when new technologies like photography were introduced 100 years ago. They helped to give birth to modern art and performance art, and really pushed our creative boundaries in new directions. And And I guess the most dangerous thing would be if this potential is not evenly distributed across the world. If access to these technologies are locked behind paywalls or other ways co-opted so that not everyone has an equal potential to use them.
Well, thank you for saying exactly what I was going to say, both for the positive and the negative thing. So yeah, positive thing, I agree, more knowledge, more intelligence, and more creativity indeed, for sure. It's not something we foresee, it's something we see already. And talking about the things we see already and not foresee is indeed the widening of inequalities between, what we call global north and global majority countries that might not have access to the technology, to the paywalls, just the quality of internet, and if we don't do anything, these inequalities will just keep on developing, if I may say. There was something else I wanted to add. I forgot. It will come in the conversation. But as technology is accelerating, we have to make sure that it's not accelerating just for one part of the world, which is ours.
Thank you very much. Still, there is lots of fear about losing jobs. You talked about creativity. Lots of creative jobs are, people say, threatened. Don't you think that it's a reality or it isn't? For instance, for designers or for people specialized in advertising and who used to imagine and draw or film, make movies for publicity, advertisement, but who are now replaced by AI. Is it something real or just a nightmare, just a kind of heterotopy that we will never see?
So it is true that some people are already losing jobs, but we need to keep in mind that it's not the AI that wakes up in the morning and fires people. It's people who fire other people. So, maybe if I'm Disney or if I'm a big corporation, I can make the choice of retraining my staff to do something else or to work differently, or I can choose to fire them. Generally, it's more the second option, but it's not the AI's fault. It's the fault of, again, humans making these decisions. Then the second thing I want to say quickly, we talk about the danger of AI for the arts, right? The art is a very big thing with many different layers and practices. Commercial artists are more threatened than experimental artists, for instance, for sure. I don't think that art is threatened as a whole, really not. Also because, as you were saying, AI is helping us to know what is really human, and that applies to art. What human beings really bring to art, what is really human in the art. So for this, it's really helping us address these questions. AI is also a tool for artists, the same way Photoshop has been a tool, photography has been a tool. So it's how we work with these new tools. So yeah, I don't want, because we often speak as AI as some kind of God, like one thing that makes decisions. This is not true. It's humans who make decisions. I think that's what I wanted to say. I took a long time to say it, sorry.
Yeah, I think also when we talk about AI making people lose jobs, I think what is likely to happen is maybe not the jobs will disappear, but they will relocate and they will change. And I think the myth of automation often tells us that people will become obsolete, etc. But I think it's rather a matter of changing and relocating labor. Like today, for example, if we think about micro work and click workers across the earth that are helping to tag and label training data, which is an excellent example of, maybe some creative white collar works in the West will be lost. But for every one of those jobs, I wouldn't be surprised if another one appears somewhere else on this earth. Sadly, though, there's maybe a great likelihood that it will be very boring and not always the most fun jobs, but there will be work, I think.
I get this mic.
Okay. Yeah, clearly jobs will go away. It's very different kinds of jobs. There's also something very fundamentally different, I think, about this time, because a steam engine doesn't think it can't improve itself, right? It's this is the first time we have this technology that can self-improve, and so yeah, maybe today humans make the decisions, but it's not fully true even today, where you have these algorithms that will rank, for example, people for hiring, that will probably also rank people for firing. And I wouldn't be surprised if soon enough the decisions that are made by humans are just better, like economically better for the company that runs the algorithm. So and then the pressure will be high to defer more and more decision making to the machines. So I think this might be a bit of a short-lived time where we say AIs don't make decisions. It's humans that do. I'm not so convinced about that, I have to say.
Kind of new externalization of bad decisions. They used to do that with Accenture and Anderson Consulting and so on, and now they will use AI. So lots of jobs lost also for Accenture and consulting, but
it wasn't me, it was the AI who decided.
Same decisions.
Yeah.
So nothing will change. Everything has to change so that nothing changes. Is it what you would say?
Let me just chip in. I mean, as often with developments, you know, it's not necessarily the end goal that is worrying, but it's the transition, you know, that the change that happens and that requires people to adapt. Now you could say, well, I mean, maybe, you know, in 10 years we'll realize that we haven't lost any jobs. And I think that's probably going to be the case, because jobs that are now being done are being replaced by others. But it's the fact that, you know, that a change is happening that requires people to adapt. And it so happens that not everybody can very easily adapt. And it's about this that we should worry. You know, the people who find it very hard to adapt to this, it's not because we have to necessarily protect them, but we have to think about this actively. You know, if you allow, just very briefly, you know, interestingly, the European Union tries to address these matters at this point by regulating AI. And they identify risks that emanate from AI and so on and so forth. But nowhere in this regulation you find anything about the risk that people lose jobs and that some people can't adapt. It's about, you know, people being injured and discrimination and stuff. But the overall societal change and evolution is somehow only addressed implicitly. I find that interesting, at least, if not stunning.
And do you think it's how is it that they don't think of that?
Sorry, I'm rewinding a bit because I wanted to add something to what Bob said earlier. When I said human makes the decision, I'm not only talking about the CEO of the company, because let's be clear, the best economic interest of any company is slavery, no social right. These are all going in the way of the economic interest of companies. So now we have to think as humans, do we make decisions to protect workers? So the human is not only, it's not only the CEO who's thinking of his shareholders, it's as a society of humans, how we protect work, or if we don't, I don't know, I don't have an answer to that. But yeah, I just wanted to make clear, I was not talking only about the guy on top.
So then there would be a following question, which is very concrete, which is, and I think something a point which was raised when we discussed before was, what would be the career path for a kid? So if if there is a kid with 12 years old now, what should be a wise choice of career for the 10 years horizon?
Depending on the country, maybe.
A good question. If any of you find the answer, I'll give you my email address. I have 3 young kids, and I'm worrying a lot about that question. What should I teach them, and how should I nudge them? What kinds of skills should they pick up? I used to think that learning to program is a good idea in general, because that is on the rise. But now we see like that AIs are becoming really good programmers. Actually, it's not so clear anymore whether that's a great career path. It's actually one of those jobs that will probably decrease a lot. You will still have some programmers, but you'll have to be ever more in the elite to remain. The menial programming jobs will go away. So the best that I can come up with is to teach the kids social skills, to be able to interact with other humans, because one, that will probably be, even in the workforce, this will become an ever more important skill. Because if you work, you will be if you're one of the few that work, or the ever fewer that work, then it will be in more management positions, I think, which will be more about communicating. And in the best of cases, those kids won't have to work at all. So I'm skeptical about that, because we used to always think that, oh, now we have automation, so we can finally work only 4 days a week, but or even 4 hours a day, but that never happened. So I'm not so. But even in that case, then they would have to have good hobbies, to spend their time, because they would still be awake about 16 hours a day. So then basically, I think we should teach our kids to become good humans, even more so than we used to, where often we might have thought we teach them to become good members of the workforce, but I think becoming good humans will become ever more important.
I have an idea.
Oh, yeah, doing something that is uniquely human, I guess, whatever that is. Doing something with smell or touch or taste, something where AI isn't really being applied at the moment, then at least getting replaced is something that lies a bit further ahead in the future.
Well, I mean, for now, AIs don't have bodies like ours. Some are robots, or indeed anything that have to do with being human works quite well. I mean, cinema has not totally replaced theater, because we like seeing real human beings in front of us doing stuff, right? It's not only a question of finance, because theater is actually quite expensive. So I think we will still keep a taste for humans. A friend of mine did work for Disney. This is why I took this example earlier. I know he became this kind of therapist that mixes like traditional medicine, massage, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's magic, maybe it's not, I don't know, but it's very successful because he's a human working on other humans.
I was going to say a hairdresser, but addressing Francois, I realize that most of the hairdressing is done by a machine anyway. So, so that probably is not going to change either. But no, I mean, honestly, I don't think in these things in such apocalyptic terms. I mean, honestly, I think it's still the best advice to a kid, to your kid, to my kid, is to do what they like to do and what they're good at. Because then you're more likely to be fulfilled. And then if it so happens that you like to drive a taxi, you're probably still going to drive taxis in some sense, even in 30 years. But it probably won't be the taxi driver behind the wheel, but you be involved in things being driven. So I'm not so, in a sense, not so worried about that. I mean, maybe, we're probably always going to need lawyers, but maybe not for the nitty-gritty questions. But, someone has to look at these things, and there's probably going to be a lot of people who will look at this. So, and I'm not necessarily convinced that, just because we have a machine doing things, it will require less human beings in the process. I mean, it's actually quite the opposite is true. When you have a machine, you need more people than you required before having that machine. You see that almost everywhere. Drones and whatever you look at that is complicated needs a lot of people. So I'm not so worried about this, maybe even just to offer a contrast to what the others are saying.
So it's simply that I realize we are all maybe a bit going on the negative. So maybe there is a connected topic that was touched a little bit, which is legislation. So how to mitigate some of those impacts. And so one of the key aspects is responsibility. So it's something that shows up almost everywhere with AI, whether it's a language model doing stupid stuff, saying stupid stuff to an autonomous vehicle. So again, on this point, what maybe I guess there are some with expertise here that can maybe tell us a little bit what is either the current situation or where we are heading on the short term, and also what would be, according to you, the ideal setup in terms of responsibility. So bad stuff happens with an AI. What do we do?
Thank you. I should have seen this coming. But I thought I'd accommodate the others. Look, don't ask me for an ideal setup. I mean, this in the law, an ideal setup is inexistent. You know, it's a compromise. It's what Parliament decides, what the courts decide, etc. But I can say one thing. I mean, I'd say the responsibility puzzle is not so complicated for a lawyer to solve. I understand that it's factually complicated to say who did what, and maybe no one did anything anymore. But the law is well positioned to take normative decisions in this regard and simply say, like, look, in this chain, you will be responsible. You know, the commander in armed conflict will be responsible under these and that circumstances, and that we can settle even with regard to very generative AI, if you like. But it's true. I mean, now, of course, in a phase that we're looking at, which is a transitional phase, if you like, we're asking these questions, and we don't have firm, positive, reliable solutions yet. But I'm very confident that this will be in place in you know, not in no time, but soon. Essentially, it's, you know, for a court to take a decision to say, well, in these circumstances, if you drive a car, even if you haven't clearly foreseen everything, you will be held responsible. We've had that number of times in the past. Some courts, for instance, in France, created this kind of liability out of thin air. You know, if there's a risk and you created it, you're liable if there's a damage. And that we can do also with regard to AI. So legally speaking, that puzzle is not so complicated, unlike the puzzle, for instance, about copyright and intellectual property, you know, that might or might not be lost because AI is doing something. But maybe the others have creative ideas here too.
It's
So I don't know for the people listening, but for me, it's not even clear. So when you say that you think there will be a framework on the reasonable one emerging, what would it look like, even roughly? What does it look like? So typically, if we take the autonomous vehicle scenario, so I buy a car, I don't touch the wheel because hopefully legislation will allow me to, and then some horrible stuff happens. What do you think would be of course, I don't ask you to predict the future, but what would be a reasonable legal framework in such a case? Who goes to jail if somebody goes to jail?
At the risk of monopolizing discussion, that the others should also contribute. I mean, that the question you are asking is precisely one that is not so complicated, right? Because car producers who that are producing autonomous cars, or like the, you know, early levels of autonomy, they're very clear about the fact that they're ready to assume responsibility for anything that happens with these cars. It's, you know, and that's just also kind of the natural solution. You know, if the person in the car can't steer the car, obviously that person can't be held liable because she's just a passenger. But then who else could it be than the producer? And then we say, well, the producer didn't foresee that particular instance. But then, yes, you should have tested it better, and so on and so forth. You know, these are kind of standard mechanisms in the law. And if there is no positive rule of law saying like the producer is held liable, then if there's no standard answer in the law as it is written down, it'll come from the courts. But of course, you'll have to distinguish that from the question who goes to jail. Not always when there's damage has to go to jail, especially if, you know, if things are not foreseeable. But jail is something that, you know, yeah. Okay, but maybe the others could chip in.
So that even if the legal question is maybe straightforward, that's kind of often orthogonal to the ethical question, right? Which is still interesting. Might be harder because the law can make some rule. Maybe it's at times arbitrary, but then would we all agree that it's the right thing? Maybe that's where it starts to be a bit more tricky. And also, self-driving cars is, I would say, maybe the most the simplest of technologies there, because the car is designed to not have any will or volition. But I would posit that in some time, maybe in decades, we will have AI that has most people would be willing to attribute a will to it. They would say this entity wants something, it has a goal, and it makes decisions. It just doesn't just execute what it's told to do, get me from A to B, but it's actually a persistent agent that will be there for an indefinite amount of time, and maybe is instructed to just do whatever your owner wants, or something very vague. And then should we still, like, let's say that Google creates this AI, but then it goes over into you are now the commander of it for 50 years. Is it still Google that's reliable, that's responsible for it? It's the thing has been interacting with you for 30 years, and has tried to map what you want and trying to help you. Doesn't at some point gradually responsibility go more to you or to the thing itself, maybe? Because if it's not so dependent on you, maybe it's more like a partner. I could totally foresee that people will even have romantic relationships with artificial systems, and they might have a will of their own. It's I don't know.
What does the lawyer answer
About romantic relationships?
All right, I'll try to be brief on this. The answer of the law is really simple. It's a thing. It doesn't have personality. It doesn't have a will. It's a thing. It's not human. That's it. End of the story. That's what the law says at this point. Everything that has a will is tied to the human. Now, that might obviously change. We might change our view and say, like, wow, this, and you can see that happening when you interact with the large language models. You can already see yourself saying, like, oh, it feels like interacting with a human. And then maybe we change that notion. But as it is now, we can very firmly say, no, that's not the case under the law. I mean, that doesn't prevent you from attributing it morality or anything. That you can still do, but the law doesn't do that. And I'm kind of content with this status quo. You know, as a lawyer, I usually work on the base of the law as it stands. Everything that comes our way is kind of normative and not so relevant. But I have so far failed to see a reason why we would significantly alter that position. Why would we do that? I mean, of course, I mean, you upload your brain and then, okay, fair enough, you want to retain personality. But that's all, to me, that's a bit exotic, if you like. But hey, maybe I'm too, as I say, too much rooted in the present. And you're more looking towards the future. But really, I want the others to have the microphone.
No. I think this question is so difficult to answer. I think when it comes to law, and one of the most difficult things will be to determine what is in the context of generative AI, for example, what has been created by a human and what has been created by a machine. And I think this question is extremely difficult and complex. And even though we might say we want to create a legal system that protects humanly produced works, sort of the nitty-gritty practicalities of deciding what is, I think, will be really, really difficult, like genuinely difficult. Not just because these the generative systems will get better at producing things that look like something that comes from a human, but also because at a very fundamental level, our creative output has always been distributed and sort of, it's always been something that takes place with the help of technologies, and that's not necessarily a problem. I think if you look at art history, for example, there are, numerous examples from Renaissance painters to contemporary artists who call themselves painters and are recognized as painters, but who don't touch a brush. They've had assistants doing the painting and worked in large studios to produce artworks. And this is how, literature and art and so on is made. It's this will be a problem. I don't know how we will fix it. I don't have a solution, but yeah, it will be interesting to see how it develops.
You're looking at me for the solution? No, I don't have it either. No, I'm just really impatient because we've been hearing for a while about the day when AI will have a will or will be sentient. We have many films about that, right? I don't know why it sounds so obvious that AI will be sentient at some point, because I think it's more than a big step. It's like a total change of everything. As smart as these machines are, they're not sentient at all. They just give the illusion. So I don't have any comment. I just want to say I'm very impatient to seeing it.
Yeah, add a remark. As you said, art history knows that since a long time, art has been collective, and it's very difficult to know who is inspired by whom. What I find interesting is that there is a kind of retrogradation about art now because of AI. Suddenly people think that there is one author, there is one original, etc. Whereas things were different, and we always knew that there were no originals, that there are no authors, etc. And how is it that the law would go backwards? Is it possible to do that? And for artists also, how is it in the art world?
Maybe just to say something briefly on this. I think that's precisely the difficulty we face with regard to art and anything creative, is the fact that the technology works so much like we used to work. Like we used to accumulate experience, and then we copied from this, and then a little bit from that, and then we kind of mixed it together, made something new, which is precisely what it does. But somehow, in a sense, artificially, we managed to draw a line and say, like, this is new. She's the creator, and she holds the rights, even though she worked off Rembrandt and you don't know what. So we managed to do that. The other point is that I think that the quality of copyright and the other intellectual property rights being what they are, it has a large, let's say, potential is probably not the right word, but I'm going to say it nevertheless. It has a potential to stop everything that is happening with AI. Because, as we all know, or I suspect at the very least, much of what is happening with AI is happening on the basis of what humans produced. And as intuitively as a lawyer saying, I don't really see how these rights that are attached to these things that humans created can be lost just because the machine takes them and puts them together anew. So ultimately, there's a possibility that the courts will say, look, you can't do this because this belongs to this human and it belongs to 1 million of humans. And the rights are not just erased because the machine does something new with it. And if that happens, then a large language model will fall silent because it's not allowed to speak anymore. I mean, whether that's going to happen is a question also, because courts are not immune, of course, from policy and from politics and so on and so forth. So it's maybe not so likely, but it's possible.
Yes, maybe about copyright. You said we were like regressing with the idea of what is art, everything. It's again a very complicated and multi-layered question. I think the first writer who insisted on having his name and kind of created copyright, I might be wrong, but I think is Cervantes, who insisted on signing Don Quixote. And even in the second book, the beginning of the second book is about someone who copied him, like with the fake Don Quixote. I don't know if you read the book. So he's kind of inventing the idea of copyright, and this is my character and don't touch it. Then the modern copyright laws, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, I think in Europe in the 19th century, it came from publishers more than artists. It's the publishers who are protecting their books, their scores, then later their recordings. Then the artists benefited a bit from that, but it's really the question of, now we're touching on the question of single authorship, who does art belong to, who is really benefiting from copyright laws. As an artist, I can tell you that it's not always the artist, or not so much the artists are benefiting from copyright laws. Just keep in mind that the great-grandchildren of Ravel's husband's maid's second husband, and I'm not inventing that, are now driving Ferraris on the rights of the Bolero, of Ravel's Bolero. So maybe the issue is not, maybe the issue is copyrights themselves as they're designed. They're also an impediment for many people to access knowledge, to access art. Many artists in the world are not protected by copyrights. No, I'm just throwing examples, and they're not necessarily consistent. There was this whole debate, about how Picasso, for instance, was inspired by African traditional art. So who gets the money? Is it Picasso or the guys who made the mask that Picasso was inspired by? So it's a huge mess. And I think when we are very concerned about copyrights, I think we're not concerned really by the right problem, and we're not protecting the right people. It's your turn.
So there are actually two questions online that. So one comes back to one of the first things which was said, and I think by you, about AI making us smarter. I think it's reasonable. Somebody asks a question that it could have the opposite effect, that it makes us dumber because we rely on it. So can you comment on this? Or why is the optimism?
Well, it's true. It might make the human dumber because we rely more and more on the AI. But if you see us as a symbiosis, then the whole thing will be smarter. That's what I meant to say.
And then a very concrete question about the existing legal framework. So the question is, how does it extend outside Europe? And it's true, it's mostly European. So maybe very concretely, what's the international situation regarding? Maybe.
I mean, we have to say that the European framework of the European Union is not in place yet either. It's being negotiated at the moment. So in a sense, there is no binding law on this that is specifically targeting AI at the moment. It's upcoming, it's evolving, even in Europe. But it's true that if and when it comes into force, and it likely become applicable somewhere in 2025, the organs of the European Union are in these very weeks trying to hammer out the compromise, and it's likely that they will find one. Then it will become applicable in 2025. And that's for Europe, and that's the type of regulation that Europe at least hopes, or let's say the European institutions at least hope, will influence regulation worldwide. Factually, we call that the Brussels effect, the effect of Brussels, directing regulation worldwide. Factually, the behavior, directing the behavior worldwide. So that's the scenario. But others are also not asleep. And you know that in the US, they are beginning to consider these things. And what might appear to us as being, a slow movement, or the US being slow, that's actually probably quite deliberate, and it's not necessarily a stupid move to be slow at this point, from various perspectives, innovation and so on and so forth. But in a sense, if you want to hear about the regulation worldwide, I can only say that there isn't much. There is a couple of recommendations from the UNESCO, from NATO also with its specific targets and so on. But we're not looking at a situation where we have something that is, in a sense, encompassing everyone on the worldwide, and it's not likely to come about very soon. Good enough?
Okay, so maybe following in this line of points regarding legislation and more formal impact, there is also, you pointed this out at the beginning, the balance between the rich West countries and the rest of the world. So it's also how much of a problem it is, and is there any way of mitigating it? Because that indeed doesn't seem to get better.
I mean, if there are any investors in the room, you can go to, Zambia, for instance, a very stable country. You can go there, open IT labs, train people there. They'll be as smart as Europeans because they're very well trained and very difficult. I mean, so it's just choices, where you develop your economic activity. So again, it's just normal humans making decisions of where they want to develop their activities. That's all I can say. I mean, the fact that this divide is getting bigger and bigger, it's not random. It's a choice. It's a choice that we develop everything we make in the Silicon Valley, in Europe. But people in Africa, in Southeast Asia, they have brains. In India, they work really well, really fast. We just don't develop stuff there. We just go there to use them as in little. We're talking about sweatshops and make them maybe moderators and not using the potential that there is there. So, we need to understand it. It's a choice we make every day. It's not fatality, if I may say.
Yeah, when I think this, and I guess it relates a little bit, but when artificial intelligence and its intelligence is only imagined in the context of, or mainly imagined in the context of corporations and business and economics and selling us more T-shirts online, I also think we are losing a lot of this, the potential that this technology could have around the world. So I think if we could also figure out ways as a society or for the legal system to support open source solution and communities, I think this could have a big impact in around the world as well.
I agree. Yeah, of course. Open source would be great, but it takes a lot of resources. You know how much it costs to run ChatGPT for one day to just serve it? 3 million. So when people thought, wow, amazing, Microsoft gives 1 billion to OpenAI, this is through in 1 year of just serving the model, not even training a new one and so on. So it's hard doing that. Open source and grassroots will be really, really hard unless you go and sell T-shirts online and so on, and the money has to come from somewhere. So it's hard to imagine how to do it.
I mean, maybe I'm a hopeless optimist, but it would be the first time if someone told me that I was a hopeless optimist. But look, I mean, again, I don't think it's necessarily a doomed situation. I mean, maybe we don't know it so well, but the global South is very diverse also, and there's stuff happening in Kenya, there's tons of stuff happening in India, which, we're not even aware of. So it's not like we are kind of, racing ahead and the others are just, dumb looking around and don't know what's happening. So that being said, I mean, yes, it's true. It's very expensive to run these models and so on and so forth. But it's also true that oftentimes after one of the proprietary solutions came about, then there is soon an open source solution, which is almost as good. And things, at least to my mind, also to some degree, do not always become more complicated. You know, doing something with AI is not always terribly complicated. You know, sometimes it's also very accessible, and you can use that now. You know, ChatGPT is there for you to build upon. So I don't think the situation is doomed in that global south will always, you know, lag behind further. But it's true, the infrastructure and so on is a problem. So I'm not kind of, you know, I'm not denying anything here, but just maybe to have the picture a bit more nuanced.
And also people get used to free solutions that are not open source. It's not a problem for them. And on a daily basis, they still use it, and they want to use what is performing, what works. If you try to generate images with open source solutions, wait quite a bit of time. I tried yesterday, it took 5 minutes to get an image that was very bad. So then you go to good models. So how is it that you still believe in open source solutions? No? Personally, I think open source is almost dead now, because also people don't have time and don't take their time to help building new models and new solutions freely. They just watch Netflix films, and you say there is also this kind of social pact that is changing now. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's dead. And if it is dying, it needs our help. But I mean, I think you're right in pointing out that in the recent years we've seen technological developments happening at a speed where might have been difficult for volunteer-run projects to kind of keep up. So maybe it's a little bit slower, but in the long term, I want to think there's still hope. Yeah.
So maybe just a technical point. So there are actually all the language models are roughly, you have open source implementation which are as good, but for diffusion models for images also. So it's true that the difference is that you need compute. So it's not just a few programmers in their basement that can do it. They need at some point tens of millions of dollars. And for some reason, which for language model is clear, it's Meta trying to look good, I think, or being good. We have language model like Llama. And for images, we have stable diffusion, which, I'm really interested to see if there are some explanation, but a lot of compute was used to train the stable diffusion, which is completely available open source. So far, we are okay-ish. Who knows what's going to be the future? And so, there is also a question that is underlying all those aspects, which is to have AI act in a socially responsible way, because it's true that at the moment, we have a lot of stuff that just got traction, like ChatGPT and against stable diffusion and such, but it seems there is no plan behind in really trying to make them do any good. So again, what would be your stance on the topic? So first, is it doing good at this very moment, the stuff available? And if not, what would be again the actors, what they should do, so that AI has a socially responsible effect on the society?
I get the sense that we are still too much in an experimental phase to say if generative models are doing good or bad, or what their effects will be. But I do think when talking about ethics and these kind of things, we need to move beyond simply discussing problems of bias in training data sets and so on. I think that's a distraction that takes us away from more important issues which concern the questions that we should use AI to answer to begin with. So instead of asking ourselves that, like, is it reasonable to use it in, I don't know, medical systems or in law? We are discussing how to make facial recognition systems recognize faces better and different ethnicities better. But do we even want that? Should we even be using these technologies, and for what? And so I think, sure, it's important to think about questions around bias, etc. But I think it's really important that we don't get stuck there, and that we also think about these larger issues.
Yes, I agree. I don't know if, as someone sitting on stage, I can also ask questions to the more like programmer part of the stage. We were discussing, because we met just before so we discussed a bit about the data, the training data, and what we put in the data and what we don't put. And you were saying, should MindConf be in the data? And I think my opinion is that MindConf should be, in libraries. It should be in the data. It should be available. It should be known. And the question is more what we do with this data and how the AI manages this data. So I'm not in favor of doing a safe database, because that doesn't exist. It's always, again, decisions that are made by people with opinions. But how we make unsafe databases and how the AI deals with this unsafe database, I have absolutely no answer to that, but maybe you do.
No. No. Yeah, I was hoping that maybe there would be the beginning of answers, but no, it's so complicated. So maybe the other people have answers. Actually, are there questions in the room? Because yes.
My name's Dan. Thank you very much for your excellent conversations. Yeah, there's all this idea of, should we give rights to robots? And it comes back to this idea of, well, we have to give rights to humans. And yet as a society, there's an entire other legal entity that exists that are non-human. The companies. Why did we give them rights?
Because they belong to the humans. There's a huge discussion in the law. Can you create a company that exists without a human being, right? Then there are ways and mechanisms to do that, but the likelihood that they will stand before the courts is very low. If there's a company where, for some reason or another, human beings have abandoned it, withdrawn or died or whatever, sooner probably rather than later, it will simply vanish from existence, unless it's totally irrelevant, and then it might continue to simmer. So the point is, we give companies legal personality because there are human beings, like we give the state legal personality because there are human beings in it. And well, then you might say, well, in an AI, there might also be a human being. And then you come to the point where they fuse, and that's when it gets really complicated. But as long as we can distinguish between artificial and human, I think the answer is relatively plain.
Okay, we should probably move to another topic. We could stay on this one for a few hours. So there is one more questions from the room. Okay, there are a lot of questions from the room.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Roland Bouffenet from University of Geneva. And I just want to bring the topic back on Earth. And you guys mentioned, the first world countries and the global South. And I feel like maybe we're missing one key player, that is China. Any of us, if you happen to go there and see how AI is being adopted, less questions, less worry about privacy questions. It's truly amazing. And they're moving forward. And in many aspects of research, they are far ahead of us. And the US is getting very concerned at that. So I'd like to have the perspective of the panel.
On the mic. I would have on the more advanced, I have a question. So what would be some example of, especially for large language models, where China is really more advanced?
Well, I was referring more to robotics, for instance. So some people argue that AI is robotics and robotics is AI, and they are very far advanced in many ways. And in terms of using big data, maybe less in terms of LLMs and large language models, although they have developed their own. But otherwise, in terms of using like deep learning, using big data and applications in robotics, they, some experts in the US argue that they are ahead of the US.
But Roland, I don't understand your question. You are saying, okay, China is advanced, but what's the question? We discuss this topic because we're in a democracy, and because we define our future collectively, or try to. No, they don't do that in China.
I totally agree. And my question is to have your perspective, because they are moving ahead. And there is this kind of adoption from the society. And it has been discussed early on that we tend to be reluctant to adopt, these technologies. We have concerns. And as a society, you observe in Asia that they have, they are more like early adopters. You take Apple, they test the products there because there is much faster adoption. So the question is, will AI in China move forward, at a faster pace, and then, we will be left behind, or we will, have to adapt to what is kind of like generated there? Just your perspective.
Okay, yes, I'm not sure I have a perspective on it, but I do see where you're coming from, and there's no use denying the truth of what you're saying. But the question is complicated by the fact that there's this new dimension all of a sudden now, between authoritarian states and democracies. And navigating this field is never easy, right? The best guidance we have is we shouldn't abandon our values because the others are quicker. That's not what we should do. And I don't think you're suggesting that, of course. But I think if we can draw something good from it, it is that we should carefully question how should I put this? The fears we have from AI, because there's also in our society, there's a lot of fear that I would describe as irrational. And that can be very costly, I think, in this kind of setup. I'm not saying we have to adopt the speed or the blind faith in AI that authoritarian states have in it for particular reasons. I'm not saying this, but I'm saying that maybe we can't afford to the luxury of sticking to irrational fears. That's something I would say is probably necessary. And the problem is that this process of questioning our fears is not facilitated in our society by lots of let's say, also we have to be really careful, but by the reporting in the media, partly because it's often driven by sensationalism and fear, but also academia in part is at fault. You have to at fault. I mean, is to blame. Although I want to be extra careful in this regard, but if we always argue about super intelligence and the universe of paper clips and that super exotic stuff, that breeds fear, and that I think is not a good thing. Having fear as guidance.
Hey, actually, I have a thing about the three different things that you guys discussing a bit earlier, so I would like to view your opinion. So the first thing is about the job issues that you said, if you are losing the job, it is not because of the AI, but because of the another person. But I don't see this analogy, because this will be valid if we have 10 employees And all those 10 employees are replaced by another 10 employees who knows AI. But this is not the case. Instead of 10 employees, we are now removing 8, keeping 2 who has better AI. So this is not some instant valid. And also, like if I just look at the Swiss population, I was checking. So every year it is increasing by less than 1%, but still that is about 30 to 50,000. So every year we are decreasing the total number of jobs, but our population is a bit increasing. So what is your thing on view on this? And the second term is about the good point that you said is we should teach to being a good human being. So if they lose jobs, so they are like learning, although like government support them, government gives them some money. But the research suggests that if the people is not doing the job, then they are highly stressed. And I recently checked the paper. There is also a paper published in terms of the European Union things. So if they don't have job, in general, the statistics says that people have more stress. Plus, like one of the, in the morning keynote thing, it is about the recommendation system. It's like if there are people is alone, like they're not doing jobs. So in general, they will most of the time, they will be on the social networking site, etc. And he made the quite good point about the recommendation system that in case if it clicked on the some provocative statement, then it started giving the recommendation system about the although he's not like that, but when he sees again and again, then it will impact him somehow. And then the third point is about one of the is about the who will be the responsible if somebody does wrong, people or the Google. Then actually I looked at this from the different perspective. Like if I have kid and if he's doing something wrong, I should look at him. Sometimes I make some rules, sometimes I do something so that there's a high probability that he'll remain on the right track. So I see it in a broad perspective. So if from the government perspective, if my people I see that something is going wrong, this is the reason we are making the rules for driving, etc., etc. So I don't see it in terms of the people or the Google. There could be, because something is happening wrong somewhere, because of this something is happening wrong. So from the broader perspective, we should have come to some rules, regulations, so that this thing can be avoided. So I think here it is not, we cannot blame just the people, that people are on the wrong. So similar to I cannot blame the kid. So the being the head of the family, like head of the estate is government. So being the head of the family, I think so. So on these three different perspectives, if you can say something.
Maybe I should just say again about people losing their jobs. Again, I was not only talking about the CEO of the corporation, I was talking about society as a whole. Europe has been deindustrializing, is that the word in English? Deindustrializing for decades. And we had to invent new jobs for people. You know, there's this sociology theory of bullshit jobs. And indeed, in Europe, maybe half of the population has bullshit jobs. Like it's unnecessary jobs in offices, in administrations. But we have to find ways to have people make a living, because basically all we need to do is grow stuff and maybe doctors. That's basically the things we really need. And we don't have anyone growing stuff anymore. So most of the jobs are kind of unnecessary, but we invent them for people to make a living. So anything that AI, any job that AI replaces, we need to think collectively, what do we do with these people? There are the bullshit jobs, there are maybe the universal income, there are a few solutions, but we cannot just say like think of fatality and being like, oh no, AI is firing everyone and there's nothing we can do about it. That's not true. That was my whole point. Like as a society, we need to find these solutions, as we've been doing for decades.
There's a scholar called Lisanne Bainbridge who published an article on the irony of automation a couple of decades ago, where she talks about the phenomenon of how, like in a factory, you have an automated system that comes in or that is brought in to take over the job of an inefficient or unreliable human being. But when this automated system is in place, the human is brought back into the loop again, because you need someone to monitor if the technology or the machine does something wrong. So it's this paradox or irony of automating away the human, but then still bringing it back in all the time. And I think, speaking about the loss of jobs and this problem, I think this is also something that we will continue to see. And the more complex, difficult, important, life-altering decisions we allow AI to make, the more important will it be that there is someone there keeping track of it and jumping in when it fails, like a Tesla driver who has to be alert and constantly ready if the autopilot would switch off. That has to be ready to take over the wheel all the time. And I think this is, it's interesting to talk about, think about in relation to these fears of automation.
There was a lot of questions in this statement, but you alluded to the relationship between the parent and the children, and this is precisely the kind of thing I meant before. The relationship between the parent and the child is relatively simple under the law. If your child causes a damage, essentially as a parent, you're going to face the bill, and the law states that very plainly, and there are some reasons for you to excuse yourself and so on and so forth. But that's precisely the kind of thing that could also apply to this new thing here. And then, and then you said the government and so on. But usually when we say the government, we mean some kind of insurance. The government sets up a scheme and then it's compulsory insurance. That's also something we could do. We could say, well, everybody who deploys AI needs an insurance policy and to make good the damage. And then, well, if you're a good, if you're good in arguing, you will say, well, yeah, but that doesn't solve the problem when people actually get killed. You don't just want to have insurance and so on. But then I would say, look, people being killed is only really a problem if there's someone doing it behind it intentionally. And that's precisely not the thing that is happening here. So that's the kind of argument that evolves, to my mind, around the third part of your question, at least.
Okay, I think we are good. I don't see any. One more question.
Okay, so hi, my name is Mina. My question is about mental health, because even around me, I see a lot of people that even don't know what's AI. They don't speak up. There is no impact in their direct life yet, or maybe there will never be because of AI. Likely not, but there is a huge part of the population that have it like a buzzword, like Bitcoin or crypto, but it's not impacting them already now. But people that are working in the field, us developers, data scientists, it's going very fast, and we see how fast it's going. And there is even is in our very small community, I think there is questions about how to deal with our mental health, because I think it's bringing the stress level up a lot. Even in academia, we're like, okay, what's our role in research when you have these big companies that are every month giving new architectures, giving new possibilities, and we are not in these companies. So for us, it's stressful more and more. So, and there is who is going to help us with our mental health. But then, okay, we are a small population, but then when it's going to have an impact on the whole population, who is going to deal with this? I foresee, maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, this huge increase of the stress level, because really it makes us think about our role as humans in the society and where we can contribute and have like a vision and have fun in our lives, and where we are going to be in 10 years, 15 years, what are our kids going to do in life? I mean, we have these kind of questions because we see it coming, but it's stressful, right?
Come to the humanities, come to philosophy, and come to history departments and talk with us. I think a lot of, we have strategies for thinking about technology and what it does, and we can put these things in perspective in a really nice way. And I think we should get even better at inviting and meeting and talking about this. So yeah.
I'm wondering if people will actually be so stressed. I mean, the stress you're talking about among us researchers is very different probably than the kind of stress we have. We are stressed to be scooped in terms of our research by the companies, and maybe problems that we've been working on for many years are just going away because GPT-4 can do them all as a side effect of predicting the next word. But this is not the kind of stress that the general population will be exposed to, right? So, and there, I could see it go both ways. Maybe people will then still feel this constant competition with artificial entities, but it could also be that we are very adept at taking them into our lives. I remember reading the story once when the first train in Germany went between Nuremberg and Fürth, went 35 kilometers an hour, and people are absolutely worried that what will this do to humans, to go at that speed? It must screw us up completely, and we've adapted it very fast. And so I'm wondering, people are talking about elderly people who have a companion, then like a little robot dog, or I think the Japanese Tamagotchi was invented also with that kind of little bit of assistance. It could go that way too, that people are very happy having a bit more, even if it's artificial. Maybe there's just like some sort of uncanny valley that we have to get through, and then we're better off because we have perfect companions we don't always have to fight with. I don't know, just saying, it's not so obvious to me.
I think I would take seriously what she said. I'm not sure it's so different. The anxiousness she's speaking about, not so different from.
Take it seriously, right?
Yes, I know. No, I'm just. But you said it's different from what normal people feel. In social science, they talk a lot about FOMO, fear of missing out, and this is what you're currently feeling. There is also the JOMO, the joy of missing out, the relief of missing out, the ROMO. So maybe, of course, there is this fear, but also sometimes maybe you can try to take distance from it and try to see what is also good in the fact that you are far from the flood, and that being far from the flood, maybe you will find things and find your place differently and maybe better. Maybe it's not the solution, but that's the humanities part of it, just to continue publicity.
Maybe if I can just say something, to me, it sounds like psychiatrist is a good occupation to suggest to your children. And that's not just to you, but generally. Sorry about this. But I'm only half joking. I think this is actually true, right? But on a different note, I think, there is a problem, I think, with an intergenerational problem as well, because people like you feel it, that it's relevant now, and you feel that it will have an impact, a very deep impact on your future and what you're doing now. Whereas, at least to my mind, in the older generation, that's not always the case. And it so happens that oftentimes the older generation is holding the levels of power. So I think we do have a generational problem here. I see that at university where, let's say some older colleagues kind of, belittling it, say like, well, it's just a new thing of internet, you said that too, and .com and so on and so forth. But to people like me, this is like, it's very short-sighted. So I think there is also truth in what you're saying in these terms.
Actually, maybe a clarification about your question. So you think that the problem is the unpredictability of what is in front of us, or are there some specific topics? So because there are some points we have not discussed yet, on time is running out, but about, for instance, the loss of meaning. So the fact that on it, which connects to what it means to be humans. If AI is able to do poetry very well and is able to do pizzas very well, then what do we keep? And also you touch a bit on the social partners or romantic partner. You seem to be very not seeing this as a big problem, but we could see it as a problem in the sense of people getting even more socially isolated. So maybe just to can you just confirm, is it just the unpredictability? So we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, or do you have some special points in mind that are stressful because, they are going to challenge things that we rely on?
No, I think no, I think it's really the fact that it's hard to have a long-term goal in life. And I think this is important. I mean, as you said, one of the questions was like, how do we teach our children? And education, I think, is something that we really need to think about what is important. So for example, now there is like no point of doing a systematic review anymore. You can ask ChatGPT to do it, but while you do a systematic review, you learn a lot of things, methodological things. So you check, okay, how do I read a lot of papers very quickly? How do I screen? How do I make a relevant summary? How do I prove some points that I want to prove, etc. So you learn a lot in the process of doing it. Now there is no meaning of doing it anymore. So we should think a bit about what are the skills we want to keep it as humans, and this goes through education. And those are questions that, I don't know how to change the way we teach our kids so that they still have the intelligence to have like long-term goals in life that makes them happy.
I don't know if I'm going to say exactly what will reassure you, but it's looping back to what we were saying at the very beginning when we did say a few optimistic things about what is really human about humans. And I think it could help us to think about this in each of our disciplines and areas of interest. For me, part of my activities is to translate between French and English in both directions. Fiction stuff, so artistic stuff. And I'm very happy that DeepL is here, because when I have one day to translate, 3 pages, DeepL is doing the first draft in 10 seconds. That took me like a few hours to do. So I have the full day to make this translation perfect, beautiful, poetic. And maybe engineers will try to convince me that robots will make poetry that is as good as humans. I don't think it's possible, because computers don't poop, don't have anxieties, don't lose their hair. So I can finally use double or triple the time I have for this thing to take care of this part that is deeply human. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think it's the same thing in research, that there's all the boring stuff that now takes 5 seconds, and you can finally focus on what is meaningful to you.
Because you grew up before. So you had to learn maybe in another way. Now we will have like it's just this question. I'm not at all pessimistic. I'm really happy to use all of these tools. But I think it will change a lot our skills.
It will change the skills as any machine.
Yeah.
And I'm not that old, by the way.
But, no. Sorry.
So we're actually reaching the 3 p.m. mark. So the panel comes to an end. So maybe as a final remark, will all this bring us back to reality and physical world? So it's a bit like industrial food, and then there is a backslash toward organic food. So what as a final remark, where will we be in a few years? So we will realize that with videos and images produced by generative models and agents that we can discuss with, which are funny, and we can spend hours discussing with them, the effect will be drifting toward even more isolation. So people just interacting with their own little world, with their little AIs for them, completely disconnected from each other. Or on the contrary, we'll go back to the campfire, cooking sausages and discussing the real stuff. Because at the end, we are reaching a point where, as a matter of fact, a piece of digital media in particular will not be carrying more truth than discussing rumors and gossips. So we are going full circle here. So how do you see the society in 5 years?
I guess I made the mistake of sitting next to you, Francois, because then I always have to answer those questions first without thinking, and then I have to blather to keep thinking in the background until I finally have an answer. And but I think the campfire would be nice, but my bets would be more on the more isolation part. We've seen, I mean, we've already with social media and so on, it's like that, right? We're kind of officially connecting with others, but really we're less around the campfire. And now a lot of this will be virtualized. If we look at Facebook, they're building this metaverse and so on, where you can seamlessly switch out real people with avatars that will be amazingly true and so on. So I fear it's easier to go that direction than to go back to the campfire. I hope it will not be like that, though.
Well, thank you. Let me try to get back to what you said about the de-skilling argument, because it kind of ties in with what Francois says. It worries me a lot, and that's obvious as an educator. I need to be worried about that. In a sense, it's a huge challenge to make sure that we retain the skills that we need in order to say, well, that's now actually wrong, what, this thing spits out. And lots of students are concluding, well, it's not really good because it doesn't know the difference between these two cases and so on and so forth. So that's what we're seeing. But in 5 years, maybe the students are not able to do that anymore. So the task of the educator will be to ensure that they're still capable of, having the knowledge, questioning that stuff. And that will be a huge challenge to educators. But here also, I can go back to what we said before. From an educator perspective, it's very plain that, at least in this specific field, AI will have the effect of creating much more jobs, because it's very simple. Now I can, mark like 100 exams in 3 days, whereas in the future, I won't be able to say whether they actually wrote this, and I will have to sit down with every single student and ensure that this student actually knows what they're talking about, whereas now I can just trust. So this, you can see, we are discussing this because the revolution that is coming requires us as universities to have much more resources to handle this, to ensure that people will not be dumped in the future. Here we have an abundance of jobs if we're ready to commit the resources. And that's also true for the disinformation thing. It has become more and more difficult to make sure, to be sure what is what's the truth. Requires more people to work on this and to make sure and so on and so forth. But I agree that the tie-in with what you asked is a little bit loose. But anyway, I'll leave it there.
I think constantly interacting with AI and being surrounded by synthetic content will make us speak and dance and eat and play and laugh in ways that are more and more sort of human. It will push us towards finding the humanness in us, as we talked about before. And I think to an increasing extent, we will be surrounded by these kind of I'm not a robot tests, where we constantly have to prove our humanness. And I don't only think that this is a bad thing, because like I said before, I think it will push us in new creative directions where we will see art and things happening around us that are exciting and fundamentally novel in many ways.
Yes, and earlier I was talking about theater not being replaced by cinema, and I'm always coming back to the same point. AIs now don't have bodies. So we still go to see objects, paintings, stuff that, is not digital. I mean, maybe we're not all aware of this here, but there is a world outside of our computer screen. So maybe we will enjoy this world more and understand its value more. And maybe one day AIs will have little arms and will take little brushes and paint stuff. But okay, I'm just being my own parrot now. These robots will not be anxious, or in a different way, they will make their own art. If they're sentient, they will make their own art. They will not make human art. I've been collaborating with a AI for the past 2 years that's dedicated to art making, and it is making its own art. It's not replacing anyone. It has its own logic. It has its own training. So I'm just, I guess, developing what you just said about what is more human and what is less human, and it will help us, and enjoy our humanity in a more, in a clearer way somehow. I think I got lost in my own thoughts, but there's still a margin between now and when AI makes stuff, it will make different stuff. So it's not replacing, it's doing something else.
If I can say, or maybe last words, AIs can say thank you, but they can't applaud. So let's applaud.